All right, folks, so the last time we met, we were talking about the first bank of the U.S. and how it was or was not constitutional. So, why does Hamilton want to create a bank in the first place? Who can raise their hand and tell me why Hamilton wants to create a bank in the first place? Giovanni. Yeah, but what are the basic reasons why? He wants to what? To control commerce, definitely. Why else does he want to create a bank? Ava? To print money, definitely. What else? Abel? Huh? To help control and levy taxes. Joseph? Stabilize the economy. So there are a lot of reasons why Hamilton wants to create this bank, because he needs the power to be able to pay off this debt. Now, how does Jefferson feel about Hamilton creating this bank? Does he like the idea of him creating this bank? No, he does not. And he says, you can't create the bank because creating the bank would be what? Unconstitutional. Now, what is Thomas Jefferson citing when he says that this bank is unconstitutional? Leslie? He's saying in the 10th Amendment, according to the 10th Amendment, creating a bank would be unconstitutional because does it say anywhere in the U.S. Constitution that Congress has the power to make a bank? No, it does not. So it says power is not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution are given to who? The states. So if Congress can't create a bank, who can create a bank? The states can, according to Thomas Jefferson. And is Thomas Jefferson correct in his interpretation of the Constitution? Sure. Nowhere does it say in the enumerated powers that he has the power to create a bank. So Jefferson says if Congress can't make a bank, the states can. But Alexander Hamilton responded with what? Eva. The Elastic Clause, also known as 1818, also known as the Necessary and Proper Clause. And pretty much what this meant, or what this said, was that Congress could do what? It could do anything it needed to, to make a proper government or to complete the previous powers. So does Congress have the power to coin money? According to the U.S. Constitution, it does. Does Congress have the power to regulate the economy? Yes, it does. Now, if Congress needs a bank to regulate the economy, to print currency, to borrow money, which is things that they're allowed to do, but they need a bank in order to do it, does Hamilton believe that the Elastic Clause gives him the power to create that bank? Yes, he does, because it says we have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So if I need a bank to print currency, do I have the power to create a bank? Pretty much, folks, the Elastic Clause was designed to be a built-in flexibility. It was designed to be built-in flexibility to be able to stretch the Constitution. Because could we list every single power that the government needed to have in order to make it successful? No, that would take way too long. So they listed the main powers and they said, well, you now have the power to do that. Because if I said, okay, you have the power to print currency, you're like, sweet. Now I need to go buy some paper, to print that money out. I said, whoa, did I say you could buy paper? No, all I said was you can print currency. I never said you could buy paper. But what would your response be to that? Yeah, how can I print money without paper? So do I reasonably have the power to buy paper in order to execute my print money power? Because what says I can? The Elastic Clause. So let me put this a different way. What Thomas Jefferson believed in the 10th Amendment was really can be broken down into something called, if not allowed, then forbidden. If it's not allowed, then it's forbidden. Whereas the elastic clause is more like, if not forbidden, then what? Then allowed. If not allowed, then forbidden. If not forbidden, then allowed. And let me explain what this means. You often see these signs around campus, right? Wherever you go. So, if I was Thomas Jefferson, or rather, let's say this sign, okay, let's do it this way. Let's say we're having a pizza party tomorrow. So, all right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and have a pizza party tomorrow, so make sure you guys bring sodas and pizza. It'll be a great time tomorrow. So, like sodas and Coke, or bring sodas and Coke tomorrow and pizza, and we'll have a great time tomorrow. So, I said you can bring sodas, Coke, pizzas. So the next day you come in with pizza and someone brings in Pepsi. And I'm like, whoa! If I was Thomas Jefferson. And if I was a Jeffersonian, I'd be like, whoa, I'm sorry. Are you bringing Pepsi into this pizza and Coke party? Because if I remember correctly, I said you could bring pizza and you can bring soda, but specifically Coke. And what is that in your hands, dare I say, but Pepsi? Did I say that you could bring Pepsi? No, I said you could bring Coke. So get out. Because if it's not allowed, then it's what? It's forbidden. Because are you allowed to interpret what I meant by saying bring Coke and pizza if I was Thomas Jefferson? No, I said pizza and Coke. Are you allowed to bring water? No. I didn't say you can bring water. Does that make sense so far? Suppose you're driving to work, and I say, "Oh yeah, go ahead. You're welcome to drive my car." So then you walk up to my car and you open the door. I'm like, "Whoa! What do you think you're doing?" Well, I'm opening the door to drive a car. Did I say you could open the door? Did I say you could sit down in the chair? Did I say you could put the key in the ignition? Did I say you could turn that? Did I say you could move the steering wheel and put on the gas and the brakes when needed? No. I said you could drive it. It's all you. Maybe you could drive, but you can't open that door. Because if it's not allowed, then it's forbidden. Does that make sense, folks? That is known as strict interpretation. You're only allowed to do what? What you're told. Are you allowed to stretch beyond that? No. Very strict. Because the problem is, if you're allowed to interpret and stretch that, then might that give you more powers as a president, maybe. So they want to make sure that it's strict interpretation. Hamilton, however, does not believe like a Jeffersonian does. Hamilton is a loose construction. He believes in loose interpretation. And Hamilton believes what? If it's not forbidden, then it's allowed. So I see these signs around campus all the time. No food or drink. Okay, so fine. So I'm going to go ahead tomorrow, and I'm going to bring a slice of pizza and a bottle of soda. I know. Because it says, well, Mr. King, you didn't say I couldn't bring bottles of soda. This is not a cup with a straw. And this is not a hamburger, Mr. King. This is a pizza. So according to your sign, I'm obeying it exactly. But it didn't say I couldn't bring a bottle of soda and a slice of pizza. It just said no cups with straws and hamburgers. Or you might say, well, Mr. King, my hamburger has 2 patties. This only has 1. And you didn't say I couldn't bring 2 patty burgers. You just said no 1 patty burger. Or if you look at this one, like, oh, no firearms or weapons allowed on campus. Okay, so you're saying no guns or knives on campus. Okay, I'm going to bring a grenade tomorrow. Well, you didn't say I couldn't bring a grenade. You just said no guns or knives. So I'm not being ridiculous. I'm just being a Hamiltonian. Because am I trying to get as much power from it as I can? I am a loose interpretationist. I'm a Hamiltonian. Because if this was the Constitution, am I trying to stretch it as much as I can? You said no guns or knives. I brought a grenade and a rocket launcher. If you didn't want me to bring it, you should have said it. But you didn't, so I think we're okay. Opposite side, bring soda and pizza. But if you bring water, you're not allowed to bring water. You see, you bring soda, you bring water to a soda and pizza party. What's next? Alcohol? No. You bring exactly what I bring you, because if you start bringing whatever you want, pandemonium. First it starts with water, then alcohol, then drugs. No, I can't have that. You do exactly what I say you do. Make sense? Yeah. So that's ultimately how this works, folks. Strict versus loose interpretation. Ultimately, in terms of their interpretations about whether or not a bank should be created, Hamilton says only the states can do it because it's not in the Constitution. Sorry, Jefferson says that. Hamilton says we can create a bank because it's part of the Elastic Clause. Who's right? They're both right. And like I said before, is this an ongoing debate that goes on today? Yeah. Gun control, Obamacare, health care, military, environment, cars. Every major debate ever in American history has been about whether or not it's a federal government power or a state power. Every single debate is about this, one way or another. Well, we got to compromise somehow, and ultimately we decide to create the bank. So despite Jefferson's frustrations, he says, fine, we'll create the bank. So Jefferson agrees to create the bank. But he creates the bank with one caveat. He says, I will allow you jerk, to create this bank if you move the capital of our country from New York to Washington, D.C. Because New York is considered to be where? Geographically in the Americas. It's in the north. Whereas Washington, D.C. is considered to be in the south. So the idea was, New York should become the economic capital of the world. But Washington, D.C. should be the political capital of the world. And by doing so, was that going to split the power of the country between the North and the South? That's the idea. Because otherwise, if the political capital and the economic capital are both in New York, is that going to make the southern colonies or southern states a little bit weak? They say, we want to have influence on our government too. So fine, you might control all the trade up in the north, but we want to make sure we have influence over the politics in the south. Make sense to everyone? And Jefferson's from Virginia, so he's like, okay, I'll be happy with this so long as you move the capital like 5 hours from my house. I'm like, okay. So they agreed, and they decide to create Washington, D.C. Questions or comments there so far? None? So that's the compromise there. So finally, after that, Hamilton has his first thing to help pay off the debt, the bank. But is that enough to pay off the debt alone? No, so he has to create some other things. The next thing that Hamilton creates to pay off the debt is the Tariff of 1789. And the Tariff of 1789 first off, do you guys know what a tariff is? It's passed as a law, but a tariff, just so you guys know, is a tax. But it's a tax on imports, which means what gets taxed. In your own words, when I say it's a tax on imports, what gets taxed? Items that are what? Coming into the country. So things from like England, France, whatever else. Does that make sense so far? Items coming into the country. So this tariff was a tax on imports. That's what all tariffs are, by the way. But this tariff played two roles. The first role of this tariff was as a revenue tariff, which means the purpose of this tariff was to do what? If it's a revenue tariff, what is the purpose of it? to bring in money, right? It's supposed to make revenue. It's supposed to make money. Because when we tax stuff coming into the country, we make that money, right? We collect it. Oh, England, you want to sell potatoes in America? Fine, you have to pay a tax for every pound. Like $1 a pound for all the potatoes you bring in. So if they bring in 40,000 pounds, how much do they have to pay? $40,000. And that's good for us, right? Because we'll make money off of that to pay off the debt. But there was another reason why we had this tariff, is that it was a protective tariff. It's a protective tariff. Now, what was it supposed to be protecting? Remember, it's a tax on stuff coming into America. Not leaving, but it's supposed to also protect what? So because they're taxing stuff coming into America, it's also supposed to be a protective tariff. What are they trying to protect? It's not about invasion. Huh? It's not about smuggling. Let me give you an example. Suppose you want to make your own car company, all right? And you're going to start off small, right? And so when you make your first, let's say, 5 or 6 cars, are those first few cars going to cost you a lot of money to make or a little bit of money to make? A lot of money, right? Maybe, let's say, $100,000 for the first few cars. Because are you going to be able to buy a lot of steel and a lot of tires like Toyota or Honda are able to do? No, right? Their cars are like $40,000 or let's say $30,000 because they buy in bulk, right? They don't buy just one sheet metal for $10. They buy like 100 sheet metals for like 80 cents a piece. Does that make sense so far? To everyone, like going to Costco, but for cars, right? So the idea is you are obviously going to have very expensive cars. And so are you going to be able to compete with Toyota or Honda or Ford? No, there's no way. So clearly, is your business going to fail? Because who's going to buy your $100,000 car if I can buy a Toyota for $30,000? So here's the problem so far. Suppose, let's say your car, let's use more smaller numbers. Suppose your car costs, let's say, I don't know, $15,000. Okay? And a Toyota, or say a Honda, costs, let's say, $10,000. Okay. You're a smart consumer. Which car would you buy? The Honda, right? So even if Draven's the guy selling the $15,000 cars, you know what? Am I still going to buy the cheaper car? Sure, so sorry, but your cars are just too expensive. I'm going to pay for the $10,000 car. But Draven lives in LP. And here's his business. Would LP benefit from Draven selling his cars? They would, right? Because they would take all the revenue from it and whatever else. So they say, here's what we're going to do. If Honda wants to sell its cars in LP, we're going to put a tariff on it. And we're going to add a tariff of $6,000. So now, how much is a Honda worth for us LP residents? $16,000. So now, might Draven be able to compete in this car industry? He might be able to compete now. Because what did we do with the import prices? We raise it so now he's a little bit more competitive. Might some people still buy Hondas? Sure. But now is Draven more competitive? And will his business be able to compete with these larger companies? That's what a protective tariff does. What it does is that it protects infant industries. Because we're American industries new. And were we going to be able to compete directly with British industries? No. So they're selling shirts, let's say, for like $1 a piece. Can we sell our shirts for $1 a piece yet? Maybe we can sell for like $5 a piece, but there's no way I can compete with that. So America said, or Hamilton said, fine, we're going to put a tariff on British goods coming in so that their shirts will now cost $5 too. So now who gets to make a fairer choice? The American people. Right now we can say, we can decide equally, almost apples to apples, the $5 British shirt versus the $5 American shirt. Does that make sense to everyone? So here's why this is good. Do we as a country make money off of that tariff? Yeah, that's awesome. We're making $6,000 per car. And are we helping our own businesses as well? So it's a double plus. But Thomas Jefferson does believe that this is unfair. And particularly, Thomas Jefferson thinks this is bad for the common man. And farmers, really. I want you guys to start getting used to the term common man instead of the poor. Start referring to the term common man. But the common man, according to Jefferson, is getting screwed over by this tariff. Why? Why might the common man, you or I, might not be benefiting from this? Like, sure, Draven's benefiting from it. His company's going to succeed now. But you and I, why is this tariff bad for us? But why is it favoring the rich?
It's raising prices, so you have to pay more.
Ultimately, it's about, you're right, it's favoring the rich, but it's raising prices. Folks, what was the cheapest car we could buy before the tariff? 10,000, right? Now, what's the cheapest car that we can buy? 15,000. So as a poor farmer, does that suck for me? I could have bought food for like $10 a pound. Now, because of that tariff, the cheapest I can buy is $17 a pound? That's not fair. Sure, that helps your businesses, but what about the rest of us? I'm not a manufacturer. All you've done is made things more expensive for me. Does that make sense to everyone? So according to Thomas Jefferson, while yes, I understand why you're doing it, this is not very helpful to me, the common man, because all you've done to me is raised prices. So do you guys understand why he's upset about it too? So there's really two sides to this coin as well. But again, good for the American economy? Definitely. Protects our industries, helps it grow, does kind of screw over the common man, but that's life. The third thing that he does to help pay off this debt then is he passes something called the Whiskey Excise Tax. So an excise tax, folks, is just another fancy word for a sales tax. So you know when you guys buy a 99-cent burger at McDonald's or wherever, does it cost 99 cents? No, because you have to pay that 8 or 9% excise tax, but in this case we call it what? You pay that sales tax, right? So it's really $1.07. You're like, but I only bought 99 cents. And I'm like, well, too bad. By the way, you know where there's no sales tax? Oregon. No, Washington. No, it's Oregon. Oregon, there's no sales tax. So when you buy something that's $5, it's $5. I know, it's like the land of like easy monetary planning. Because you go to the store like, I only have $20. What should I buy? I'll buy the $20 meal. I'm sorry, it's actually $23.05. No! I don't have enough money, and I spent 9 hours planning for this. No, but their income taxes are very high though. So even though like their sales taxes are non-existent, when you pay taxes out of your payroll, it's actually quite high. So it's not like they don't get it somewhere else. They do. It's just that it's not on the daily thing that you purchase. So whatever. Anyway, sales tax. Hamilton decided that one really good way to make money was to tax whiskey. Because do Americans like to drink a lot of whiskey? They sure do. And which class probably likes to drink whiskey? The poor, the common people, or the wealthy? The common people. And are there a lot more common people or wealthy people? Common people. So he figured, let's tax something that's used a lot, because is that going to make a lot more money? They're like, yeah, let's do that. Let's tax whiskey. Now, who did not like that? The common people. They're like, whoa, buddy. I grow wheat for a living. In case you didn't know, whiskey's made from wheat. I grow wheat for a living, and if you put a tax on whiskey, are people going to buy as much whiskey anymore? And are people going to buy as much of my wheat anymore? So am I, as a farmer, am I going to get hurt by this tax? Like, I don't like this. I am not okay with this tax. You are destroying my livelihood. And the farmers were so angry that what ultimately happened was the Whiskey Rebellion in 1790. So folks, a rebellion of farmers breaks out against this tax, and all of a sudden, all the leaders of the United States are having flashbacks of what? Shays Rebellion. They're like, oh my gosh, it's Shays Rebellion all over again. Farmers are angry, running amok. And the last time we had Shays Rebellion, what did that tell us? We had a weak government. And so are we concerned that this rebellion might destroy the U.S. once again? We're like, oh my gosh, we can't do this again. We have to handle this. Because if we struggle with the Whiskey Rebellion, what is that going to tell us about the U.S. government? It's also weak. So can we struggle here? We can't. We can, but should we struggle here? No, and Washington won't let us. Washington says no, no, no. I will not let this happen. Sure, they might be rebelling, but we're going to put an end to this right now. So Washington responds to the Whiskey Rebellion by getting on his horse and pulling together the U.S. Army. And in response to those 300 farmers that are rebelling, Washington doesn't bring 300 soldiers, though that might have been sufficient. He doesn't even bring 1,000 soldiers, because that probably would have been good enough too. In order to make sure that we didn't struggle even the least bit, because if we struggle even a little, would people question our strength? To show that we didn't struggle at all, Washington decided to lead an army of 13,000 soldiers to put down a rebellion of 300. That's like 40-1. And so like the farmers like, ah, they're like burning down the place. And like, wait, and they stop, like, wait, you hear that? He's like, Duke. It's like Jurassic Park where the table's like shaking a little bit. And then they look down the hill, and there's this massive army marching up the road. Washington sits on there, points at them like, you! Not really, but he looks at his eyes like, I'm gonna get you. And then the farmers freak out like, oh my gosh. The vast majority of them scatter. A few, like 90, stay to fight. Many of them are arrested, and 3 are killed. But the rebellion is put down in hours. How is that different from Shays Rebellion? One, we had an army, and how long did it take us to put down Shays Rebellion? Weeks. Shays Rebellion took weeks to put down. Here, hours to put down. So what is the significance of the Whiskey Rebellion? It showed that the U.S. government and the Constitution was strong. That's the significance of the Whiskey Rebellion. It showed that the U.S. government and the new Constitution were strong. Because can we respond to things like rebellions? Yes, we can. Could we do that under the Articles? No, we couldn't, but now we can. And so we've shown and proven to the people, yes, we can respond accordingly. We have a strong government now. But in your mind, should you constantly be referring to Shays Rebellion as a counter to this? So if you haven't already, just write down Shays Rebellion in your notes. Like, always refer to Shays Rebellion when talking about the Whiskey Rebellion. Because they're almost like two sides of the same coin. You have Shays on one side weak, you have Whiskey Rebellion on the other side strong. You should be able to mention both. Well, we had the power to create an army now, so we don't have to like debate about it. And do different states still have their local state militias? They do. So he said, I need soldiers. Send me soldiers. And they did pretty quickly, and then they marched. So, yeah. Good so far? Okay. Now, what was Thomas Jefferson's response to the Whiskey Rebellion, you think? This rebellion of farmers who were rebelling because they thought there was an unfair tax that was then crushed by the U.S. Army. Was Thomas Jefferson happy with what happened here? In fact, he was so upset. Thomas Jefferson opposed Washington's response to the Whiskey Rebellion because he said, this right here, this looks exactly like what? It looks like a military dictatorship. Those men were protesting a tax that they believed was unfair, and you responded by sending the military? Now, I'm not a historian, But my memory tells me that that exact same thing happened during the American Revolution when the dictatorial king tried to tax us, and he responded with the military. George Washington, I warned you not to do this. But every single time I warn you about Hamilton's plans, you keep on taking Hamilton's side, and I just can't take it anymore. So I quit. Okay, I just can't handle this. So Jefferson gives George Washington's resignation, like, you don't care about me. All you do is listen to Hamilton, and then no matter, you don't even listen anymore. You're just always listening to him. And so Jefferson puts his resignation on the table. He starts crying, and then Washington's like, Jefferson, come here. It's okay, Jefferson. He pats him on the back, strokes his head a little bit. He says, Jefferson, look, I'm not always going to take your side on this. Understand, none of this actually happened, but the point still comes across. I'm not always going to take your side on this, okay? But I can't have you resign, because do I need your point of view when making these important decisions? I'm not going to take your side all the time, but I need to hear your opinion. The people need you to be here to give me their voice. So you can't resign. So dry your tears, Jefferson. I don't hate you. It's not you. It's the country. Okay, the country has different needs right now. So it's okay. Don't leave. I need you. Jefferson's like, okay, Washington. And then they became best friends again. But in any case, though, is Washington tending to side with Hamilton all the time, though? Sure. Because the reality is Hamilton seeing the bigger picture? In the long term, this is what's best. But Jefferson is concerned that in order to succeed, are we kind of screwing over the common man? And so Jefferson believes that there must be another way to become wealthy and successful than on the backs of the poor and common. But Hamilton says, and Washington says, I don't see how to do it in a productive and effective way. And one question you guys have to constantly ask yourself then is this: could America be as great as it is today if we did not take advantage of the poor, the weak, the women, the slaves, whatever? It's a pretty important question, because if we could still be as successful as we are today without having done all the terrible things that we did, we might want to reevaluate what we've done as a country. But if this is what we were supposed to do, then perhaps, we just say, well, what other choice did we have? We had to murder these people. We had to do X, Y, and Z. But something to evaluate for yourselves. Anywho, ultimately, folks, with whom did Washington side? He sided with Hamilton. And this feud between Hamilton and Jefferson about the Constitution, about the tax, about the rebellion, about everything, it ultimately results in Hamilton and Jefferson kind of breaking apart, and they start to form what? Political parties. And so as a result of the feud between Hamilton and Jefferson, you see the rise of the first two-party system in America. How today we have Democrats and Republicans? Well, this system that we have today begins with the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. It's the feud, or the dispute between Hamilton and Jefferson over the Constitution and everything else will result in the rise of the first two-party system. And we're actually going to fill out this chart, and this will explain why they had differing ideas. So start drawing this chart, and we're going to fill it in line by line together. So at least write the intro, write the title, and then we'll do the columns one by one. So the Federalists. Who do you think was in charge of the Federalists, Hamilton or Jefferson? The group that was called the Federalists, was it Hamilton or Jefferson? Okay, first up, do you think that the Federalists were pro or anti-federal government? They're pro-federal, so it must be Hamilton. So this is Alexander Hamilton, leader of the Federalists. So that means the leader of the Democratic Republicans must be whom? Thomas Jefferson. Now, what groups might be their supporters? Like what classes, what peoples, what regions of the country? Who might support Alexander Hamilton and all of his ideas? Definitely the rich, the wealthy, same word. What region of the country? Like what areas of the country? The north, and specifically the northeast. That's where all the cities are, the trade is. Cities would support him. What type of professions would support Hamilton? Yes, not, but like what types of professions would they be? We don't have factories yet, but like business owners. Like business owners would support him, businesses, and merchants. Because he's all about trade, right? On the other side, we got TJ. And who would support the Democratic Republicans? The common man, very good. What region? And west. So we refer to the northeast as the northeast, but there's the south and then there's the west. Does that make sense, folks? So northeast counts as just one region, but then there's the south and then the west. So they're considered two different regions. Most of the people that support Jefferson are also of what profession? Farmers. Okay. In terms of the debt, what was Hamilton's plan to pay off the debt? What were some of the things that he wanted to do to pay off this debt? So you want to create a bank, sure, the bus. What else? Huh? But be specific. Like, what specifically did he do? The whiskey. Well, the rebellion wasn't his plan. The whiskey tax. What else did he want to do to pay off the debt? Remember that tax on imports? What was it called? Tariffs. Good. And also assumption. What was Jefferson's plan to pay off the debt? Oh, nothing. It's not that he didn't want to pay off the debt, right? It's just that he didn't come up with any solutions. He just complained a lot. He's like, no, that's not good. Well, do you have any suggestions? No, just don't do that. Well, can you help? Like, well, just don't tax people. What? Doesn't make sense. Well, I guess to be fair, he just was like pro-farmer, but that wasn't explicit. Anyway, where does Hamilton get support for all of his ideas in the Constitution? No, in the Constitution. Where does he get all his powers from and ideas? The Elastic Clause, also known as what? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Necessary and proper. And what type of interpretation was all of this? Of the Constitution? This is considered what type of interpretation of the Constitution? Loose interpretation. Whereas Jefferson, where did he get his constitutional arguments from? The 10th Amendment. Which was known as states' rights, reserved powers, and what type of interpretation was it? Strict interpretation. You guys can write down, if not forbidden, then allowed. If not allowed, then forbidden also, if that helps you guys remember. Federalists, were they pro-federal or pro-state? If you get this wrong, you don't understand anything. Are Federalists pro-federal or pro-state? Federal. Of course, they believe in the federal government. What about Democratic Republicans? They want the power to be where? State governments. And lastly, do the Federalists want the bus or no?
Yes.
They're pro-bus. What about the Democratic Republicans? Anti-bus. By the way, folks, just using your knowledge of society today, which of these two groups do you think succeeds? Democratic Republicans. And what do you think ends up happening to them? They'll split. And then they'll switch sides. It gets weird. We'll talk about political parties throughout history, but this is the beginning. And do you guys understand why they have differences of opinion? They really just have different opinions about the Constitution, who should be supported by our taxes, where the power of the government should be, whether or not we should create a bank. Our political parties have very similar stupid disputes, right? Obamacare or not, gun control or not, gay marriage or not. Same basic ideas about what's happening here. But everyone good so far on this? And on the creation of the two-party system? Any questions about the two-party system? So, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning I don't understand, and 5 meaning, yeah, I got this. Show me your understanding of the rise of the two-party system. So 1 being you don't get it. 3, 4, 5 meaning you do get it. Okay. So ultimately what it comes down to, just to clarify, is that the biggest issues you guys need to understand is first off this idea that Hamilton believed that the federal government is where the power should be, and Jefferson believed it should belong in the states. The other key issue is the fact of constitutional issues. Whether or not the Constitution should be interpreted loosely, because if the Constitution is interpreted loosely, that gives more power to who? What government gets more power if the Constitution is interpreted loosely? The federal government. If it's interpreted strictly, that means the federal government can't become more powerful. Does that make sense to everyone? And lastly, you should just know this idea of like the rich versus poor. If you can understand that it's a class issue, constitutional issue, and a power issue, that's the basic idea behind these two parties. Okay. International incidents during Washington's administration. So far that was all domestic. What does it mean to be domestic issues? What are domestic issues? Stuff that happened within the country, right? Now we're talking about international issues or foreign issues. Have I already told you the story about the guy who didn't know what foreign meant on the last day of class? So I think my first year teaching, this is my fault to be fair, but I guess no, it's not my fault. It's his fault. We're writing our final exam, and the question was, assess the political, foreign, and economic consequences of like, I don't know, World War I. And then he raised his hand in the middle of the essay and he said, Mr. King, what does foreign mean? And I said, wait, it's the last day of school. How is it that no time throughout the school year when I said the words foreign, did you not decide to ask yourself, what does this word mean? And then not ask. Also, I've explained to you what this word means several times. But anyway, if you don't know what a word means, ask, because you'll end up being that guy, and then don't be that guy. Never fun being that guy. Anyway, international incidents during Washington's administration, things that happened internationally that Washington had to deal with. First major issue, what's happening here? The French Revolution. So the first major international incident that Washington has to address is the French Revolution. Now, folks, the French Revolution. Would this be something that maybe we as a country might support? Huh? Washington. It's Washington's job. Would this be something that we as a country would support, the French Revolution? Yeah, right? Because what were they doing during the French Revolution? They're trying to do what? They're trying to establish a democracy, get rid of the king, right? And so we saw this and thought, oh, we did that. We gave them hope and inspired them to fight for democracy. we influenced the French Revolution, right? We did that. You guys learned this in world history. We influenced the French Revolution. So things when they scream like, liberté, égalité, fraternité, those ideas were our ideas. Liberty, equality, brotherhood, that's all us. And so both Democratic Republicans and Federalists, would we support something like this? Both parties were like, yeah, French Revolution, we did that. Those guys are our friends. And then the French Revolution got weird. And in 1793, Robespierre began what during the French Revolution? That really just changed the French Revolution. You guys remember what Robespierre did? Huh? He started killing people. What was that time period called? The Reign of Terror began in the French Revolution. And the Reign of Terror changed everything. Remember, it's called the Reign of Terror, not like rain from the sky of terror. But the Reign of Terror began. And during the Reign of Terror, who were the French Jacobins killing? But specifically who? They were killing specifically who? Which groups of people were they killing? The royalty and the wealthy. They were killing the rich elite. And all of a sudden, this stopped being a political revolution, and this became what kind of revolution? It was a social revolution, right? It was like the poor versus the rich. And who in America stopped supporting the French Revolution? The Federals are like, I don't know if we should be supporting this revolution anymore because they're killing rich people now. And if I look in the room during our club meetings, we're all rich. And if we say that what they're doing is okay, might that spill over in America? So the Federalists stopped supporting the French Revolution. But the Jeffersonians, are they all for this? They're like, yeah, the poor overthrowing the rich. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, this is exactly what needs to happen because Jefferson would always say, sometimes the tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of patriots. Sometimes do people have to die for change to happen? Jefferson's like, yeah, I'm okay with this. But we all watch as this is happening, and the rich in America are horrified. They're like, oh my God, that could have happened here. Because couldn't it have happened here? Our American Revolution could have gone from political to social. And we were so happy that it didn't. But then the French Revolution kicks it up a notch because eventually Europe declares war on France. And why do they do that during the French Revolution? What are the European countries, England, Prussia, Italy, what are they concerned about? That the revolution might spread. So what ends up happening is this. Europe, or the European powers, declare war on France. And so France looks to who? America. And they say, oh, it's war now, is it? Who are my friends? Did I sign a treaty with someone recently that said that if I help them, they'll help me? Did I sign a treaty? I did sign a treaty. What treaty was that? Oh, I know. The Franco-American Alliance. Remember that treaty that we signed following what battle? Battle of Saratoga? Where we said, hey, France, if you help us, what? We'll help you back. Well, now does France need our help? Yes. And now, this is a problem. Because do we really want to go to war? No, we don't. So, France says, America, we need you to honor the Franco-American Alliance. And Washington thinks about it and says, no, we're not going to do that. And instead, Washington replies with the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793. Washington decides not to honor the Franco-American alliance for several reasons, which we will outline right now. The Franco-American alliance of 1778. So he decides not to honor the Franco-American alliance of 1778. Here's why. One, could we lose? And if we lose, who might try to take us over again? The British. So number one, we wanted to prevent a potential invasion from England. So one, we wanted to prevent a potential invasion from England. Because if we lose, we might lose all of this. So we wanted to prevent a potential invasion from England. Number two, why don't we want to fight wars? Yeah, we don't have the money to fight another war. Do we want to add to our $76 million debt? No. So we lack the resources and money to fight another war. How many wars have we fought in the last 30 years already? 2. The French-Indian War and the American Revolution. Now we have to fight a third one? No, thank you. Yeah, we're good. I think that the 76 million is really good right now. So we don't have the money. Number 3, we don't have the population to fight a war. We just don't. Washington says we have to have babies. We can't go off and fight a war. And even if we have the babies today, we can't send the babies into war. I mean, that would just be a really awkward war. And so he said, we just can't fight this. We just don't have the resources. And so I'm sorry, but we are not going to get involved in this war. Was France really upset about this? Yeah, because we broke a treaty. And are there consequences to breaking treaties? Sure. So after Washington's administration, we'll talk about this when we come back next time. We'll talk about this idea of an unofficial war that France will fight with America that next president will have to deal with. But the good thing, though, is did Washington keep a cool head this entire time? We could have gone straight head into war, right? But we didn't. He kept us cool, and Washington prevented war. And that's really the most important part here, that Washington prevented war that we were not ready for. He prevented entering a war that we weren't prepared for or we weren't ready for. I think that's really critical. Because might another president have just said, yeah, let's go to war now? And would that have been bad? Sure. But Washington did not do that. Good with that? Okay. What's happening? International incident. We're still having problems with England. England is still doing the following. England has not left the frontier forts. Remember how they said they were going to? Well, they didn't. So England has not left the frontier forts. While at the frontier forts, what is England also still doing? They're inciting rebellions. Native American rebellions, right? So they're paying Native Americans to attack us. So they're not leaving the forts in our house, and they're inciting Native American rebellions. The other thing to keep in mind is that they're still engaging in impressment. Now, do you guys remember what impressment was? That's when they forced U.S. sailors into the Navy. You guys remember that? So all this stuff is still happening. And might this cause a potential war with England? Because they're not abiding by the treaty. The Jeffersonians are clearly angry about all of this. They said, so we're not going to go to war with England because of France. Okay, I get that. But you're telling me that it's okay for them to not leave our territory. They're going to constantly send Native Americans to attack us, and they're still going to keep capturing our sailors? No. We're going to go to war if we have to, because that's just ridiculous. They are not taking us seriously anymore. Now, does Washington want to go to war? He definitely does not want to go to war. He wants to avoid that as best as possible. So he said, we got to figure this out. I know what I'll do. I'm going to send John Jay to sign Jay's treaty. So Washington responds by sending John Jay to sign Jay's treaty with England. So John Jay, Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time, goes to England. He negotiates with the British. He comes back super excited. He goes, guys, I'm back. And I've got the treaty. And the Federalists are like, oh my God, yes. What did they say? He's like, all right, ready? Here we go. So here's the treaty. Here's what it said. Number 1, all right? Check this out, guys. It's a great treaty. Number 1, they said they will leave the frontier forts eventually. Eventually? Pretty good. So that's the first part. They'll leave the frontier forts eventually. Okay. Number 2. All right, what does it say here? Remember the whole thing about Native American rebellions? They're not going to stop. But they're sorry. They're sorry about the last ones. But they said they're going to keep doing that. So, they're sorry. That's pretty good. I got it in writing, so we know they apologize. Number 3, remember the impressments? Yeah, they're going to keep doing that. It says right here, they're going to keep impressing American sailors, but they'll pay us for the previous ships. So we'll get the money back. Am I right? Oh, but there's a 4th one. We didn't ask for this, but the British thought it'd be really important if we brought it up. We had to pay back our debts sooner. Pretty good treaty, right? And he was getting high five to the Hamiltonians. And they're like, nice job, John Jay. You got that treaty from the British. But how did the Jeffersonians feel about this? What? This is the treaty? How is this the treaty? You didn't get them to leave the forts. You didn't get them to stop inciting Native American rebellions. They're still impressing our sailors, and now we have to pay the debt back sooner? What did you do? And John Jay replied, as all the Federalists did, what did this treaty do? Well, no, they're going to say, no, there was a benefit to this treaty.
Oh, they have to go to war.
It prevented war. So they said, look, it's not perfect, but it prevented war. And so, was this a terrible treaty? Oh, most definitely. But it prevented war, and that's the most important thing. But the Jeffersonians, they were livid. They were angry. In fact, they decided to burn John Jay in effigy. You guys know what that means? It doesn't mean that they literally burned John Jay. It means they would make like stuffed, like scarecrow-looking things of John Jay, and then burn him. Like, I wish this was you, John Jay, and they set him on fire. Because you are horrible, and you ruined everything. But the Jeffersonians felt like they got betrayed. They said, are you a British man or an American man? Because they genuinely felt that John Jay and the Hamiltonians were trying to eat from the palm of the king. We don't like this, they said. So do you guys understand why the Jeffersonians were upset about this treaty? They really didn't get anything out of it. But there was an unintended consequence. The unintended consequence was Pinckney's Treaty. There was an unintended consequence, which was Pinckney's Treaty. And what happened was that this was a treaty that we signed with Spain. What happened was that Spain saw that we had a treaty with the French. Hold on here. And Jasmine, what treaty was that we had with the French? What treaty did we already have with the French? The Franco-American Alliance. And we also said that we already had a treaty with the British, which was what treaty, Maria? John Jay's treaty. So the Spanish said, oh, we don't have a treaty with the Americans. And the Americans are like the coolest kid on the block because the British have a treaty with them and the French have a treaty with the Americans. I want a treaty with the Americans too, so we all could be in the best friends club together. And so the Spanish actually approach us with the treaty. And they say, hey, America, I hear you're the new kid. What if, and you're welcome to, if you're interested, what if you be my friend? And America says, well, what do you have to offer? I said, well, here's what I got. He opens his jacket. He says, well, I will give America access to the Mississippi River and what really important port that we always want, Jalissa? What's that port that we always want at the mouth of the Mississippi River? Boston's like on the East Coast. What is it? Right there. New Orleans. Because if you control New Orleans, do you control the Mississippi River? If you don't control New Orleans or you don't have access to New Orleans, you can sail all the way down, but the Spanish won't let you out. So what's the point? So the Spanish give us access to the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans. Yay! And who's really happy about this, by the way? The Federalists or the Democratic Republicans are really happy that we now have access to this river here. The Democratic Republicans, because most of the people living out here are what? They're mostly farmers. They're like, all right, great, we can trade now. I like this. So even though they hated John Jay's treaty, were they kind of happy with Charles Pinckney's treaty? And they're like, okay, fine. We'll take that treaty too. Gravy so far? Okay. Well, eventually, George Washington will have to step down like most people. And in 1796, George Washington steps down in 1796. And when he steps down after serving only 8 years. And what he does is he establishes what is known as a two-term tradition. Because, folks, Washington was elected unanimously the first time, right? And the second time he ran for re-election, he won again. In fact, almost everyone voted for him. And so he only served 2 terms. But could he have served for a 3rd term? And a 4th term? And a 5th term? Washington could have served until when? He died. And would he have constantly been reelected over and over and over again? He was a superbly popular president. And he would have eventually become a what? If he served until he died, he would have made the presidency a, not necessarily a dictatorship.
Like a job to be in. I don't know, I'm trying to explain it.
But it's almost like, but it'd be like almost like a monarchy, right? But he knew that this was something that he did not want to happen. And so he decided on his own, I've served 2 terms, I've served 8 years, that's enough. And he stepped down, making a 2-term tradition or a precedent for presidents. A precedent for president. I'm not just saying president twice. Precedent for presidents. Who can raise their hand and tell me what a precedent is? It's very similar to another word I've already written down here. It's a tradition. But why was it so important for George Washington to do that? Yeah, everyone else would follow in his footsteps, right? Suppose that John Adams or Alexander Hamilton, someone else decides to run for president the next time, and he's after 2 years. Would anyone ever dare run a 3rd term? Because if you did, they'd be like, oh, I see you're running a 3rd term. I'm sorry, do you think you're better than the great George Washington? He did it in 2 years. Are you better than George Washington? Do you honestly think that you are better than everything that he was? No. Don't you dare run a third term. In fact, someone did try running a third term, Teddy Roosevelt, and he didn't win because he was haunted by that two-term tradition. Today, can you run more than 2 terms? No, we've changed that policy. But by George Washington creating that 2-term tradition, did he really save us from a potential monarchy? And that's really cool because he had the foresight to realize that it was important for him to serve only a 2-term tradition. Here's the other great thing about George Washington. He didn't have any sons. And why is it important that he had no sons? Yeah, like what if his sons ran for office after he stepped down? What might have the people naturally have done? Like, oh, hey, George Washington's son. Let's vote for him because what do we do in England when kings have sons? We let the kids become the next ruler, right? And so they said, yes, no sons. The third thing, which I think is one of the coolest things that he did, when he was first elected, they referred to him as Your Majesty, Your Excellency. Because what are the Americans still very used to when having an executive leader? A king. Said, oh, Your Majesty, Your Highness, it's so nice to meet you. He said, no. Don't call me that. Mr. President, I'm one of you. But was it so important that he did something like that? Where he had to actually change the what he's being referred to. He was a great leader. Because couldn't he have just said, oh yeah, Your Majesty, let's just go with that. They're like, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, no, Your Grace. I'm divined by God to be here. So it's not just Your Majesty, Your Grace, Your Lord, my Lord. But no, he said, no, Mr. President. He humbled himself. If any other person was president, might we have a very different office today? Someone that served for life, whose sons would be appointed after them, that was considered somewhat of a virtual king? Couldn't these things have happened? But they didn't because of him. This is why we're so lucky that George Washington was alive when he was. Because imagine if Alexander Hamilton became president. That would have been a very different country. He probably would have accepted Your Majesty because he was emboldened and just loved the idea of like a king. But not George Washington. So he does step down, George Washington. He decides to step down. And what he does is he writes what's known as a farewell address. And the farewell address was his final speech to the American people. It was his final speech to the American people. And in his farewell address, he warned the American public of 2 things. Correct. So, because after 8 years, he saw kind of what was happening in America, and he realized there are 2 things we have to make sure we never do. Number 1, he said Americans should avoid political parties. Because what are the only things that political parties care about? Themselves, their own successes. Do they care about the interest of the entire country? They only care about winning. And even if winning means ruining the country, will they probably still choose winning over ruining the country? Yeah, really good example, guys. Next week, if the Republicans and Democrats don't pass a bill, we're going to have a partial federal government shutdown because we don't have a budget to be able to continue running the government. So imagine that for a second. Now, we could easily pass a bill that says, yeah, more money. How do you feel about the Republicans? Yeah, more money. Democrats, sure, more money too. Done. No debate, no, you just do what you're supposed to do because it's your job. Instead, what they're going to do is, we're not going to vote to give the government more money until you give me this. But if we don't give you that, you're going to make sure the government fails? Exactly. They're almost holding the country hostage in order to get what they want. Now, should that be happening? Should 300 million people be affected because 535 people in a political party can't figure out their differences? No. And yet that's what's happening right now, like as we speak. That's what's happening. The second thing he warned us of is avoiding permanent alliances. We have to avoid permanent alliances. Why should we avoid permanent alliances with other countries? If they go to war, what's going to happen? We have to go to war. And so he said, are we ready for war? No. And so he said, avoid political parties and avoid permanent alliances. That's all I recommend that you guys do. If you do those two things, I think our country will be great. If George Washington was alive today, how do you think he would respond to our interpretation of his farewell address? Would he be happy, like, oh, I'm so glad that you guys listened to what I had to say? Or would he be a bit upset? Likely. He would look at the political parties, and wouldn't he be like, didn't I tell you? Didn't I say? Like 200 years ago I said this. And then what happened? Boom. I told you that. Nostradamus, George Washington. Secondly, permanent alliances. Didn't I warn you about this? I told you about permanent alliances, and then what happened? You went to war. George Washington was right. I mean, how is beyond me. He's a really genius guy, I guess. But he was right about political parties and permanent alliances. Did we listen? No. Look at where we are now. Gridlock in Washington. Wars that we never want to get out of for some reason. But were we lucky to have George Washington as our first president? Most definitely. So, here's what I want you to do. In the next, I don't know, let's see where we are in time. In the next 6 minutes or so, what I want you to do with a partner is I want you to start populating this very quick review chart in your notes. You're going to go ahead and write down all the things that happened during Washington's administration that's political, economic, social, if you can find any. We always struggle with this one, and international. So if Washington did something that was political, write that down. If something happened economically, write that down. If something was social, write that down. If it was international, write that down. Should you include things that happened between Jefferson and Hamilton? Did it happen during Washington's administration? Yeah. Yes, it did. So you should include those things as well. Passing of taxes and buses and whatever else. Everyone know what they're doing? You're doing a quick review of your notes from Friday until today, just to recap what happened during George Washington's administration, because you're going to have to do this for every single president. You need to know succinctly in a very easy place where all these things are. So I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to do this. And then we'll fill out this chart together. Yeah. Get to work, folks. Double check with the partner to see which stuff you should be writing down. All that stuff. Is anyone in girls tennis? And if you know anyone in girls tennis, let them know their game is canceled today. Because of the fire. Huh? Yeah, the Madre fire? Yeah, that's what it is. So it's called the Madre fire in Azusa. It's called the Madre fire. But yeah, it is an Azusa fire. And because Azusa High School is so close to it, the health, they just can't get outside.
That's where they're playing.
They were going to, but not anymore. Stop the coincidence. That's what happened as a result of the fire. It's a coincidence that there was a tennis match and a fire. No, it's just something that happened. That's not a coincidence.
Well, they could.
It's not a coincidence. It's something that happened. Yes, they do. But it's not a coincidence. All right, guys, so continue filling out that chart for me, please. Write down as many things as you can. So write down as many things as you can in your notes. You guys have about 3 minutes left. Plug, plug, plug. International is just things that had to do with other countries. It's like foreign. So like if we're usually treaties and stuff that's happening that we have to deal with in other parts of the country, or other parts of the world.
Thank you. No.
About a minute left, and then we'll fill this out together. Let's do this together. All right, so let's write down some of the things that we found. So raise your hand and tell me something that happened politically. Eva, start with you. Judiciary Act, sure. Let me choose a different color. Judiciary Act, sure. Someone else. What else did you find? Yeah, Maria. The rise of the two-party system. Very good. So the two-party system. Evelyn. Bill of Rights, definitely. Abel. The cabinet. Of course. Of course, of course. What else did Washington do that happened during his administration? He did other stuff. Political. What other events that happened that might be considered political? Yeah, Abel. Neutrality Proclamation is not political. That's international. Because it has to do with foreign affairs and international stuff. Any events that might be considered political? So you can talk about loose versus strict. Just know that that's about Jefferson and Hamilton. What else happened during Washington's administration that might be an event? Is there an event that happened? Yeah, Jalissa? Whiskey Rebellion, yeah. Anything else that he did that would be really good advice for us to heed? Any speeches that he might have given? Abel? The farewell address. Sure. And specifically under political, what should we write down? Yeah, for the farewell address, what part of the farewell address should we write down?
There's two parties.
Avoid political parties, sure. Okay, economic. What are some of the economic things? Leslie, what's an economic thing that happened?
The tariff.
Tariff, very good. 1789, good. Eva? A Hamilton's plan, sure. Yeah, we can actually write down all the things, so let's just put tariff under that. So that was tariff. What else was part of his plan, Abel? The whiskey tax, sure. What else was part of Hamilton's plan, Henry? The bank. The National Bank or the bus. What else was part of his plan? What did he want to do with debts? Assumption. Anything else that happened economically that we can think of? Go through your notes, folks. I think we're solid there. Unless I'm missing something, yeah. Yeah, the whiskey tax is there under Hamilton's plan. Am I missing anything? Abel? I mean, you say that the bus happened. I mean, we created the bus, ultimately. Okay, social. Is anyone able to find something that's considered social? You can argue that Whiskey Rebellion is a social thing because it's like rich or like poor. It's a poor rebellion. So Whiskey Rebellion could be considered social. Yes, but it's an international event. So Whiskey Rebellion, and think about like common farmers. Yes. Washington's inauguration, very good. Anything else we can think of that might show some social aspects? Society at all? Whiskey Rebellion's good, inauguration's good, because you can mention like the role of common versus rich in both of those. One thing that I guess you can add is the thing of like Mr. President versus Your Majesty stuff. That's always interesting. Like Mr. President versus Your Majesty. Okay, then international. What international things can we talk about? Henry. French Revolution, definitely. Joseph? The Neutrality Proclamation. Neutrality Proclamation. What else? Do you have one? Henry. Yeah, Abel? Pinckney's Treaty, sure. Pinckney's Treaty. Leslie? Jay's Treaty. Any others? Anything else that we can think of? Eva? Franco-American Alliance, you can mention that again. Anything else? There's one more thing we can mention at least. Giovanni?
Well, it's called suppression, or that's the act, or where they would take the Navy or
Impressment?
impress.
You can mention that was happening. Just make sure you tie that to Jay's treaty. So you definitely talk about impressment if you want. But it can't be a fact on its own. It has to be rolled in with Jay's treaty. What else, folks? What else did Washington do that might be considered international? Yeah, Adriana. Very good. The farewell address. To avoid permanent alliances. Cool. So, if you had to write an essay on George Washington, let's say, would you have a lot to write about? Oh, most definitely. I mean, in fact, if you had to compare the first three presidents, which is a likely essay you might have to do, you had to compare the successes. Does Washington have a lot of things to talk about? Yeah, I mean, at least there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. That's 24 things without going into detail. Now, do you have to mention all 24? No, but do you have a lot that you can pull from? Sure. And again, folks, like I said before, are we lucky that George Washington was our president? And you guys understand why now? Very, very lucky. We're serendipitous in that it happened, because if it was someone else, it could have been very different. Here's what you're supposed to do now. We're going to prepare for a debate for Thursday. Here's what's going to happen. Here's a scenario. Our current economic crisis has given President Obama pause. He worries that without proper guidance from the founding fathers, our current politicians will continue to lose their way and simply lie about what the founding fathers said or meant. Luckily, breakthroughs in technology have given us the ability to revive one founding father, either Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson. So, your task is to analyze your assigned speech, which I'm going to be giving you in a second, and your notes to argue whether Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton should be revived. So the basic idea is that you will be reading one of these letters. There's one letter on each side. Choose which one. And what you're going to do is between you and your partner, you're going to decide which one of you is going to vote for Hamilton and which one of you is going to vote for Jefferson. You can only choose one or the other. So you're going to assign person A to be Jefferson and person B to be Hamilton. Listen up. The directions are very specific. You're going to take notes and identify arguments in your notes and in the letter I gave you. I want 3 arguments from your notes and 3 arguments from the letter I've just passed out. You're pretty much going to complete this chart. Okay, or not a chart, but you're going to complete 6 total arguments. The basic idea, folks, is that you want 3 arguments from your notes and 3 arguments from the letter. And remember, this is not an essay about what did Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton believe. The argument is what? Who should we bring back to life? And it's not just, oh, because of the elastic clause. Really, what you have to consider is who would be best in dealing with our current problems and crises. So things like the war in Syria, the debt, gun control, gay marriage, the environment, whatever else, Obamacare, healthcare, terrorism, whatever. Who do you think would be best at giving Obama advice about fixing the problems in society? Things that you should consider when reviving your person. Strict versus loose interpretation of the Constitution. Does one serve our purposes better than the other? Secondly, feel free to be a bit humorous. You're okay to be a little bit funny with this because we are just bringing people back to life. So it's obviously not the most serious thing in the world, but you must cite your sources. So if you're trying to explain why you're supposed to be doing one thing or another, make sure you cite your source. You're going to say, well, according to my notes, it said that this, and I think that if Alexander Hamilton was really good at, I don't know, elastic clause, he might be really great in being able to advise us on how to deal with gay marriage because blah, 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 blah. Is your opinion going to be a part of this also? Definitely. But you're going to be arguing why you want to revive Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson. And then what's going to happen then is that the next time we meet, we're going to spend about 15, 20 minutes debating who we should bring back to life. You guys understand what you're supposed to be doing? Okay. So you can start working on this right now until the bell rings. Decide first amongst yourselves who is going to be Hamilton and who is going to be Jefferson. The letters I've given to you were both written to Washington. One is from Jefferson, one is from Hamilton. And your job is to, again, decide who should I support to bring back to life and why. So decide who's going to be Jefferson, who's going to be Hamilton, and you can start reading through your notes, letters, Start analyzing your 6 arguments.